Our scripture reading for this morning comes from John chapter 15, verses 1 through 12, and I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Version. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you.
All right, so we are, I already talked about it a little bit, but we are porous beings. We absorb the world around us in just about every sense of the word. From the food we eat, to the things we see, to what we hear, to what we touch. One example of that, and it has an impact on our lives. It has an impact on our lives. Now, these are just little simple things. How many of you have been in a loud concert, and then you step outside, and what? Everything sounds muffled and quiet, right? Because our ears kind of absorb that cacophony of noise. And then also, who hasn't seen little eye tricks like this? What happens if you stare at that dot for like 30 seconds, the black dot in the center? Pretty soon, your retina absorbs those magenta-colored circles around, and then you'll start looking around, and you'll see kind of a blue circles of dots, right? Because we absorb. But not only do we absorb, it has an impact on who we are. We all know this saying, say it with me, it involves apples and doctors. An apple a day. Well, we need to amend that. We need to amend that because we have found out that an orange a day will actually help keep the doctor away. Far better. Listen to this list of things it does for us. It provides vitamin C that wards off illness by boosting the immune system. Who's taken their vitamin C pills lately Yeah. Is there anything that tastes better than an orange when you feel a cold coming on and your body just goes, yes, please. It wants to absorb that. But they also contain a wealth of antioxidants, and these are proven to help reduce chances of cancer, right? Many of us know that already. But we need to add to that also now, recent research has shown that the citrus in an orange increases certain bacteria in our gut, which release certain enzymes that trigger our serotonin. In other words, makes us a little happier. And recent studies have shown that eating one orange a day can help reduce your chances of depression by 20%. So if you get nothing else from my sermon today, make sure you eat an orange. But my whole point for mentioning that is the fact that we absorb the world around us. And there's other research that verifies this as well. If you live in an inner city, and this is why, the church should be about justice. If you live in an impoverished inner city, a lot of times people live there because it's the cheap housing, but it's also where old manufacturing is. And so the dirt is somewhat toxic, the air is somewhat toxic. And if you live in those areas, you have a higher chance of acquiring certain cancers. So when we find ourselves in a bad environment, whether it's because of our will or not our will, we absorb that around us. And it impacts us. We're going to be in the Vineyard for a while, and as we focus on the vineyard, I want you to be thinking about these words of abiding in, which over time we absorb what we abide in. And that has an impact on us physically, emotionally, spiritually. And in this passage, Jesus couldn't make it more clear that our job is to abide in the love he has revealed, that he and the Father share in, and that he has poured out upon the disciples and upon us. This abiding. And you now know, if you were with us through our Valentine's series, you know what that love is. It's agape love, right? We know some of those components. If not, you can go read 1 Corinthians 13, and you'll see there a really good explanation about what this kind of love is. And that's what we're to abide in and absorb. And this passage says that Jesus, having fully loved the disciples as he was called to, so he fully abided in God, then offered that to the disciples, that his ministry was complete and it was time for him to set his face towards Jerusalem. That is, that's one of the passages here that begin this whole dialogue. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from the world and go to the Father. Why? Because having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So Christ's love has been fully shown to the disciples, and now it will be fully revealed to the world through his death on the cross. And in our passage, it ends by how do we respond to that? By abiding in his love and offering that love to one another. For our passage in John 15, Jesus uses the imagery of a vineyard, and he didn't just pull this out of the air. This is a rich metaphor that is found throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, or the Old Testament as we typically call it. And in that metaphor, you'll find that God has set the boundaries of the vineyard. He's set up a wall, and he's put up a tower to watch over it. And he's planted the vines within it, and he's put the mill in there to produce the fruit. And all these things that he's done to tend to the ground, and yet, the harvest he seeks to produce is not produced by the people of Israel. Now, I'm not being hard on our Jewish brothers and sisters, because had it been us, it would be the same. We fail. We fail to fully abide in him. He set this boundary and said, hey, live within this space and place. I will nurture you or produce fruit. And this was the fruit they were to produce. They were to be a people of justice. All people living equitably. The poor would find their needs met and be raised up. The rich would take their good privilege and they would use it to help others. And all would be equal under God. Justice, righteousness, each individual living rightly, but also, and more importantly even, communally, and restoration. If you violated these principles, there was a way back. There was a way of repentance. There was a gracious God and a gracious community that would restore you. And Israel was to be this fruit that produced this wine that was so intoxicating that all the nations, all people would be drawn to it. It's exactly what the church is to do as well. Now, how do we know that? Because Jesus, now if you notice in our passage, he's not just the vine, he's the what? True vine. In those metaphors of the Old Testament, the vine was Israel that God was tending. But here Jesus has come along and said, look, humanity, you can't seem to pull it off, so I will step in. I will be the vine. Jesus is taking an old metaphor and he's changing it and revealing that now I am the perfect Israel. I am the perfect people. And if you abide in me, you will find salvation. So this metaphor is found throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. And we've taken some time. There's a couple in our church that have a vineyard. And we've spent some time with them this year, over the last growing season, this year and last year, talking to them about some of the things that go into it. And as we talk about abiding and we talk about absorbing, I want you to notice what's different about a vineyard crop than maybe the crops we're used to in the Midwest. Let's go ahead and show that clip.
Yeah, when we started this vineyard, we're thinking, boy, this is going to be pretty nice. Well, the unfortunate thing is that it takes 3 years before you get a crop, a saleable crop anyway. It's not like corn or beans you plant, or wheat, where you plant it that fall, harvest it in the spring, or plant in the spring and harvest it that fall. This one takes a while for it. You have to bring them up. You have to put these stakes in there to give them something to grow on and to cling to and everything until they get up here to the top wire, which is where we want them to be. And we do that so it's for ease of picking, harvesting. And so you're going out here for 3 years, you're doing this, you're doing a lot of knee bends and picking up and bending over and a lot of back-breaking work, so that in 3 years, maybe you'll be able to get something out of it.
So you notice the difference. It takes time. And I don't want to be one of those that draws, ridiculous parallels, but I do find it interesting, and I think that maybe the concept of time, but Bob there's talking about how it took 3 years. It usually takes 3 years to produce a harvest. Does anybody remember how long Jesus' earthly ministry was? 3 years. Now, I don't think the Bible's trying to make a direct correlation there, but I think it is trying to make the correlation that it takes time to abide and to produce the harvest that God is calling us to be and to produce. A harvest that makes a wine so intoxicating that the world can't help to be drawn to it. And because of the last series we went through, and we'll reflect more upon this, and because of what John 15 says, we know that abiding is love. It's love. Love as defined as agape, steadfast. And it takes time to absorb that. One of our greatest symbol of absorbing the love and the presence and the person of Christ is communion. We know we typically begin communion in the first week of the month, but being that this is the first Sunday in Lent, we wanted to rather join this Sunday together in communion.